and happier, and how without them they become engines of misery.
Okay, now look at this context now, and this, if you read her statements now, I know she's being assertive. So I guess she's trying to drive a narrative that she knows. She's trying to give herself some sort of credibility. But I think she should be able to do this without throwing people under the bus. You know, our home country, and especially Nigeria. And I think that's one of the reasons why some of our statements have been found faulty.
And despair. Classic liberal values. Not left-wing liberalism, but classic liberalism of free markets, free speech, free enterprise, freedom of religion, the presumption of innocence and trusted institutions within the rule of law, and equality under the law, no matter who you are or where you come from. All of those things were missing when I was growing up as a child. So I know their value, and I know that in the West, we may be losing what made our countries great. I was born here, but I grew up in a place where fear was everywhere. You cannot understand.
That is, I mean, come on, man. How could she make that kind of, unchecked statement? How can you say everywhere? That is like exaggerating. Every place in the world has its own challenges, but saying there were fear everywhere, no, I don't think so. That's really out of place. And I'm happy she wasn't the only one living in Lagos at that time that she's referring to. So I'm really wondering where she got this kind of ideas of saying everywhere. I mean, that's wrong.
Stand it unless you've lived it. Triple checking that all the doors and windows are locked. Waking up in the night at every sound. Listening as you hear your neighbors scream as they are being burgled.
Come on, man. Miss Kemi, come off this. Why? You know, when you hear this kind of things like this, there are two sides to a story. You get it? So, as she's giving this narration, maybe she's feeling that she has an audience for it. She's forgetting that there's going to be a cross-referencing concerning this time. People will engage exactly, and there are papers, newspaper, tabloids that reported most of all these things in those days, or part of it, if not all, in the entirety. So, by the time the cross-referencing is done, and she's found out to be telling lies, I mean, it's even going to affect the career she's trying to protect and save.
Next, did she lie? Nope. Did she tell the truth? Yeah. So why are Nigerians so angry at her? Nigerians are not angry at the truth because it is the truth. Nigerians are angry at how she told the truth and who she's telling the truth to. So Nigerians have started calling her Now, before we get into more about her specific comments, let's take a moment to actually explain what this top theory is. Now, if you are new, and you probably already know this, if you're not in the US and you've never really heard this, the term Uncle Tom originates from Harriet Beecher Stowe's 1852 novel, Uncle Tom's Cabin. Now, the character, Uncle Tom, is a black slave who is loyal and submissive to his white masters, often at the expense of his fellow slaves. Over time, right, this Uncle Tom became a term used to describe a black person who's perceived as, betraying their race by aligning too closely with the white people on systems of oppression. And that's why they're calling her an Uncle Tom. Now, in the modern context, calling someone an Uncle Tom doesn't necessarily mean they're submissive. It can also mean that they're seen as being so critical of their own race or their own heritage in a way that appears to pander to those in power, often white-dominated systems. It's about being perceived as a sellout, someone who distances themselves from their own people to curry favor or to fit into a different mold. So how does this relate to Kemi Badenoch? Let's start with her background. Kemi was born in London to Nigerian parents.
Alright, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. Now, quickly today, we want to take an editorial on the second instance of this Kemi Badenoch, and so let's dive into it, and let's ensure that we are all subscribed to this channel. Turn on the bell notification and give a like and comment, and let's learn for life and not for school.
Do you trust the British police? I do. But remember my experience with the police in Nigeria was very negative, and coming to the UK, my first experience with the police was very positive. The police in Nigeria would rob us. So when people say, I have this bad experience with the police because I'm black and they're white, I was like, what hell? I remember the police stole my brother's shoes and his watch.
His shoes?
Yeah, they took his shoes and his watch. It's a very poor country, so people do all sorts of things. And
Wow, I think that statement is quite derogatory. Branding your native country as poor? No. I made an editorial on MIT's report on why Africa is still poor. These are just narratives the kind of narratives being pushed by the Western media, and it's just a pity that this lady is falling into that bracket, perhaps because of her interests.
giving people a gun is just a license to intimidate. But that's not the bar we should use for British police. Obviously, it should be much higher. But my experience was so positive when I was burgled, for example. The police were there, very helpful. They eventually caught the person. This is 2004, so 20 years ago. The police did catch criminals, and now we've given them too much to do, in my view. So the police are the first line of defense for everything, and I think that burden makes it a lot harder for them to actually do the basics, and that's another thing that we need to look at.
And let's talk about why Nigerians are angry with her. With all the things that she said, was she lying? Why are people angry at her? If this is your first time hearing Kemi Badenoch's name, here's a quick backstory. So Kemi Badenoch is a black British woman of Nigerian descent. She's born to Nigerian parents. She was born in the UK, went to Nigeria, and at age 16 moved back to the UK due to the deteriorating conditions of the economy in Nigeria and the insecurity as well. But why are Nigerians so angry at what she said? Now, Kemi Badenoch has been quite vocal about Nigeria, not in the way that Nigerians expected her to be vocal about Nigeria. She described Nigeria as corrupt, unsafe, riddled with issues that undermine Nigeria's progress. And let's be honest, many of the things that she said are lies. We're here to be honest, right? But the backlash she's received from Nigerians has been so intense. Let's take a look at some of the things that she said.
I grew up in Lagos, Nigeria. Thank you, Roxy. Lagos was a place where almost everything seemed broken. I grew up under a military dictatorship, and I would never have believed that 40 years later, I would be standing here as the leader of the world's most successful political party in the history of Western democracy. I was lucky in my experiences. I was born to a relatively wealthy family and had a decent education. But I also know what it is like to be poor. I watched my family become poor as their wealth, income, and savings were inflated away by destructive government policies. But they didn't call it socialism, but it definitely was. Capital controls, no freedom of movement, government owning the means of production. And there was no freedom either. The government decided which school your child went to, it decided which businesses could or could not operate, all the way to a...
Well, sorry, I grew up in Nigeria, but some of these things she's saying at this moment now, like government deciding the schools you go to, I don't think that I had that kind of experience in Nigeria. Everybody had a choice. I know there are public schools and there are private schools. So the only thing is that now, like in 2025, there are a lot more public schools and of course private schools as well. But Nigerians generally still prefer the public schools because they are cheaper and they are subsidized by the government. So I don't know where she got this ideology of saying government decided the schools you go to. And then the other aspect I want to also address is the aspect of the businesses. Government decides the business. I think it's maybe at some point in time, maybe the operations of like the refineries and all that. But I think over the years, those areas has been deregularized now. So there are a lot of private sectors coming into these things. And the thing she's failing to do is that Nigeria was still going through a stage. It's just a stage, a transitional stage. So I don't know why she's taking that old experience to be so judgmental and throwing the country under the bus.
Breasts trial, and state-sanctioned murder. So I know what freedom looks like. It's what I had in the UK. I know the values that can make citizens wealthier and happier, and how without them, they become engines of misery.
Okay, now look at this context now, and this, if you read her statements now, I know she's being assertive. So I guess she's trying to drive a narrative that she knows. She's trying to give herself some sort of credibility. But I think she should be able to do this without throwing people under the bus. You know, our home country, and especially Nigeria. And I think that's one of the reasons why some of our statements have been found faulty.
And despair. Classic liberal values. Not left-wing liberalism, but classic liberalism of free markets, free speech, free enterprise, freedom of religion, the presumption of innocence and trusted institutions within the rule of law, and equality under the law, no matter who you are or where you come from. All of those things were missing when I was growing up as a child. So I know their value, and I know that in the West, we may be losing what made our countries great. I was born here, but I grew up in a place where fear was everywhere. You cannot understand.
That is, I mean, come on, man. How could she make that kind of, unchecked statement? How can you say everywhere? That is like exaggerating. No, every place in the world has its own challenges, but saying there were fear everywhere, no, I don't think so. That's really out of place. And I'm happy she wasn't the only one living in Lagos at that time that she's referring to. So I'm really wondering where she got this kind of ideas of saying everywhere. I mean, that's wrong.
Stand it unless you've lived it. Triple checking that all the doors and windows are locked. Waking up in the night at every sound. Listening as you hear your neighbors scream as they are being burgled.
Come on, man. Miss Kemi. Come off this. Why? You know, when you hear this kind of things like this, there are two sides to a story. You get it? So, as she's giving this narration, maybe she's feeling that she has an audience for it. She's forgetting that there's going to be a cross-referencing concerning this time. People will gauge exactly, and there are papers, newspaper, tabloids that reported most of all these things in those days, or part of it, if not all, in the entirety. So, by the time the cross-referencing is done, and she's found out to be telling lies, I mean, it's even going to affect the career she's trying to protect and save.
Next. Did she lie? Nope. Did she tell the truth? Yeah. So why are Nigerians so angry at her? Nigerians are not angry at the truth because it is the truth. Nigerians are angry at how she told the truth and who she's telling the truth to. So Nigerians have started calling her Now, before we get into more about her specific comments, let's take a moment to actually explain what this top theory is. Now, if you are new, and you probably already know this, if you're not in the US and you've never really heard this, the term Uncle Tom originates from Harriet Beecher Stowe's 1852 novel, Uncle Tom's Cabin. Now, the character, Uncle Tom, is a black slave who is loyal and submissive to his white masters, often at the expense of his fellow slaves. Over time, right, this Uncle Tom became a term used to describe a black person who's perceived as, betraying their race by aligning too closely with the white people or systems of oppression. And that's why they're calling her Uncle Tom. Now, in the modern context, calling someone an Uncle Tom doesn't necessarily mean they're submissive. It can also mean that they're seen as being so critical of their own race or their own heritage in a way that appears to pander to those in power, often white-dominated systems. It's about being perceived as a sellout, someone who distances themselves from their own people to curry favor or to fit into a different mold. So how does this relate to Kemi Badenoch? Let's start with her background. Kemi was born in London to Nigerian parents, spent part of her childhood in Lagos, and then later on moved back to the UK at the age of 16. Now, we also know that she's risen to an incredibly powerful position as the leader of the Conservative Party in the UK, and she has become a significant figure in which British politics. But here's where things actually get so complicated, right? In several interviews and speeches, she hasn't shied away from calling out Nigeria's flaws that are very glaring, flaws that we know about. She's spoken so openly about corruption, the lack of safety, issues of poor governance, and the list goes on and on and on. And to be very fair, there are valid points that she's made and valid criticisms. But Nigerians themselves even complain about these things daily. You see that across social media. However, the issue is how she says it and the platform that she's using to say it. Many Nigerians feel that as someone with Nigerian roots, Kemi should be more balanced in her critique.
I chose this country because here
I think that is very important. Yes, to be more balanced in our criticism. Constructive criticism is very important. And that's one of the reasons why I introduced this series in Hands-On Lab Software Academy, our social media handle on Facebook and on YouTube, all right? So that as I teach and I talk and give you masterclass on software engineering, the ethics, the practice, and so much more, we should also balance these professions with how we actually present ourselves to the world. It's very, very important.
free, and I could be everything that I wanted to be. I grew up in Nigeria, and I saw firsthand what happens when politicians are in it for themselves.
Okay, so quite clearly, these things, some of the the setbacks, what I call it, the places where Nigeria is still lacking. We all know about it, and but it's not always the best thing to be singing it as a chorus, because there are bad politicians everywhere. There are issues of leadership everywhere. Though in Africa it might be more acute because of corruption and all that. These are things that we all know. And but the platform and the way she says it, I'm using every instance to drag the Nigerian space under the bus, is what is very, very much unacceptable.
When they use public money as their private piggy banks, when they promise the earth and pollute not just the air but the whole political atmosphere with their failure to serve others. I saw what socialism means for millions. It's poverty and broken dreams. I came to Britain determined to make my way in a country where hard work and honest endeavour take you.
They're arguing that by consistently highlighting the negatives about Nigeria on such a global platform, she is demarketing the country. Now, this word has become a buzzword recently, demarketing Nigeria. And because of that, she's reinforcing harmful stereotypes and just making things harder for Nigerians abroad who already.
That's true. I support that. Those stereotypes she's trying to push are actually very harmful. Especially for people living abroad, Nigerians living abroad, because Nigeria already has its own set of challenges, carrying the green passport and all that. It's only some very strong-hearted Nigerians and patriotic Nigerians that are still holding on to the Nigerian passport and are not willing to exchange it for anything.
Face prejudice. Now, it's one thing to acknowledge the flaws of your country, but when your tone seems detached or even dismissive, it starts to feel like betrayal. This is what Nigerians are saying. And this is where the Utom theory actually comes into play. Nigerians see Kemi's comments as a way of distancing herself from the heritage and aligning with the Western narrative that often paints Africa in such a poor light. And Nigerians, frankly speaking, are tired of it. They're essentially asking, whose side are you on? Is she speaking as someone who wants to help Nigeria improve, having her roots from Nigeria, or as someone who has no ties to Nigeria at all and she just wants to discredit it? Listen, I'm sure Kemi has made herself very clear. She's representing the UK, not Nigeria. But why are Nigerians so angry? Now let's get into why Nigerians are angry. I'm going to break it down to you. Representation matters. We should be deporting people more than we are.
You know what? One thing I also observed in this whole saga, of this lady's statements about Nigeria, and of course by large Africa, is that I so much like the way that the current vice president of Nigeria, lashed and referred to Rishi Sunak, that's Indian prime minister. That guy, despite the fact that everybody in the UK knew about his roots, the guy had never saw it a point of duty to drag India under the book. India too has issues. India is a developing country and almost very developed, but India has its own challenges as well. But the guy never used his post, that temporal post, it was to drag his roots under the bus, and that is where this lady, is missing the point. That's exactly where he's missing the point. And of course, the current vice president also mentioned the Elon Musk, who has South African roots, and several other examples, and I totally agree with him. I totally agree with him because, despite the fact that I'm not an ardent political person, I'm a neutral person. What that man said there was really, really on point.
Now, even as we are in the ECHR,
So imagine this Nigeria sellout lady talking about how they want to deport India.
I like these guys were sellouts. The issue we've had in Africa are the sellouts, and these sellouts, they usually align themselves with these foreigners, and sometimes they work in such a very harmful way, such that okay, let me give you an instance now. For Nigeria to have not been able to produce its own refined fuel, they're almost since inception, was made possible by some sellouts amongst the country. If everybody had a single mind, one mind that no, we want this thing to be completely done here, these guys would not have found their way here. They would not have plundered the country for years, such that Nigeria's local currency has become like almost a mockery. Are you getting it? And even the citizens are finding it very, very unbearable to stay here. Or let me just put it this way, that they are finding abroad, Western countries, as a means or as an escape route or a better place. That kind of stereotype thinking and line of thought. The other day I shared with you the experience of a doctor, a Nigerian doctor that left Nigeria, sold a duplex and 3 cars, and left, and just for what? For just another place on the planet, another GPS position on the planet. And obviously during that interview he was regretting doing that. So this is the bigger picture we're talking about here. The bigger picture of the likelihood that this kind of stereotypes will keep, is designed to keep making Africans, especially Nigerians, feel uncomfortable with the environment, so that they will move out. And when they move out, it might just be, of course, it's going to be pushing the narrative that abroad is always better, which is always not in the real sense of it. It's not actually, because those places have their own, their own array of challenges. Are you getting it? We've seen so many people that have spent years there and they come back, they say, well, they're coming back home because their home country is still far off better than these places.
Girl from the United Kingdom. She's betraying the system that helped her. She herself, she's immigrant. She came to that United Kingdom when she was about 17 or 16 years with student visa. She overstayed even when the visa expired. She tried all her possible best to have a job there, started working in McDonald's. Then she got the document. After some years, she became a United Kingdom citizen. And now she's talking about she wants to deport people.
Nigerians expect someone like Kemi, who has risen to such heights, to be a positive representative of her roots, Nigeria, whether she likes it or not. Her Nigerian heritage is part of her identity. Nigeria is in her blood. And when she criticizes Nigeria so openly, without balancing it with constructive input or even acknowledgement of its positives, it feels like she's just rejecting her roots, and Nigerians are not having it. The second thing is reinforcing negative perceptions. There's already a global perception of Nigeria, I'm sure you already know about it. They say that Nigeria is a country rife in corruption and chaos. Now, when someone with Kemi's influence reinforces those narratives, it gives more weight to those stereotypes, and Nigerians abroad actually worry that this could further damage the reputation of Nigeria and her citizens. The third thing is the bigger question of intent. Nigerians are also questioning, why is she so vocal about these issues? Is it to make her more accepted amongst her political peers in the UK?
And this is very important. I think this moderator that is speaking right now is mentioning this, at this moment where she's mentioning this, it's very, very important, because you begin to actually wonder what exactly, why would she, at this time, this momentary time, why would she be hitting so hard at Nigerian issues and bringing up just like that, erratically?
Is it a way to create distance from her heritage, or does she genuinely believe that calling out Nigeria publicly will spark change? I actually don't think so. The lack of clarity about her intent leaves room for more interpretation, and for many Nigerians, it just feels like her words are aimed more at dissociating herself from the country and actually helping improve it. I know she's not in a position of authority within Nigeria, but she has her roots in Nigeria, so they expect her to do that.
There are few countries in the world where you can go in one generation from immigrant to parliamentarian. Michael Howard spoke of the British dream, people choosing this country because of its tolerance and its opportunity. It is a land where a girl from Nigeria can move here age 16, be accepted as British, and have the great honour of representing Saffron Walden. Growing up in Nigeria, the view was rather different. The UK was a beacon, a shining light, a promise of a better life. Often we hear the radical reformer John Bright misquoted that the House of Commons is the mother of all parliaments. What he actually said was that this country is the mother of all parliaments. Our political institutions may not always be held in high esteem, but I believe that politics is a mirror held up to society.
Sometimes I just wonder, she's saying Britain was a beacon of light. I mean, if you really look at it, at the roles of British in Africa, like how they decimated some tribes in Namibia, in Kenya, these are still history in the books. Even in Nigeria, the Benin was destroyed by the British, and they took the artifacts that they're still claiming in their museum till today. So how is these same people beacon of light in plundering, encouraging corruption and chaotic systems? I can recall the role Shell played in Niger Delta. These guys operated with impunity, and destroyed communities and people's livelihood in Niger Delta, and they left without completing their rebuilding or giving compensation to this community over the refinery or the refining processes or activities that they held there. So how are these people, so that really brings you to light that the intent of this lady is just one-sided. It's not really for Africa or Nigeria. It's just for herself, obviously.
Yes, it can sometimes be unedifying. Yes, we see human weakness on display, but it also embodies much that is great in our country. As Woody Allen said about sex, if it's not messy, you're not doing it right. Madam Deputy Speaker, the same is true for democracy. It is not always...
I'm almost thinking that in the midst of these Western folks, as a single, obviously, is someone who is from African descent, does she think she's really going to scale convincing these people about the narratives and the stereotypes they have about Nigeria and her? They are not, because they might just be laughing on the surface, but in between, within their hearts or their minds, they have a different picture. But I just hope she sees this before long.
Predictable. Its results are not always elegant. It can throw up results that no one expected, but we adjust. The British Parliament always has adjusted, and that is why it is the oldest in the world, because it takes its lead from the British people.
Let's balance this debate. Now, here's the thing. Kemi Badenoch is not necessarily wrong in her observations. Corruption, insecurity, poor governance, they are very real issues in Nigeria we see every day. But the question Nigerians are asking is this: does criticism without context or constructive solutions actually help anyone? What difference does it make? It just causes chaos. Now, on the flip side, Kemi supporters argue that honesty is necessary for growth. They believe that sugarcoating Nigeria's challenges will not solve anything. They also point out that Kemi has a right to speak her truth as a British politician, not a Nigerian politician, regardless of her Nigerian roots. But here's where
She has a right, yes, but others also had a right. Richie Sunak, like I said earlier, also had a right, and they did not do that. Why would you do that? Why would you choose to do that when you had other options? There's several people who are immigrants world over, who left their home countries and are making impact in their host countries. But they don't drag their native countries under the bus. That's the difference. And that is where she's wrong. And this is very, very important.
I think the balance actually lies. There's a difference between calling out and calling in. Now, with calling out, it focuses solely on criticism, which often alienates the people that you're criticizing. Whilst calling in, on the other hand, it acknowledges flaws, but it also works to inspire solutions, to build bridges, and to invite collaboration. Nigerians might be more receptive to Kemi's words if they actually felt that she was calling them in rather than calling them out. So what do you think? Do Nigerians have a right to be upset with Kemi Badenoch for her statement?
Of course they have a right, because she's being unpatriotic. They have a right. Great and fine. There are issues that are being faced by the country. If you want to compare Nigeria at the moment to the US, they are complaining of insecurity and other issues. Quite right, understood. What about countries, like of recent now, I heard about this Australian, calling out, or trying to give some sort of notices, some weird notices about visiting Nigeria and all that. Why would it be at that time, this time that Nigerians in diaspora that have other citizenships are returning back just to have a taste of their home countries? Why would they release such kind of, statement that they should, travel advisory and all these things are just being stereotyped, They actually have a purpose why they are doing it. They have a hidden agenda while they are doing that. Everybody knows that in the US there is the gun violence and the terrorists is even at very early this year, 2025, you are already hearing news of terrorism in the US. So why are people not bringing up travel advisory to these places? So though some countries are anyway, but it's not as loud as they do when it comes to Nigeria and particularly Africa.
And so, is she just being honest about the challenges that we face as a country, Nigeria? Should someone with Nigerian roots hold back when discussing the country's flaws, or is it better to air out our dirty laundry for the world to see? And here's the big one. Do you think that the Uncle Tom theory actually applies to Kemi in this context? Is she distancing herself from Nigerian heritage to align with Western ideals, or is this criticism just what the doctor ordered? They say the more you hide the rot, it festers in the dark. So is she doing Nigeria a favor? Let's unpack this together. At the end of the day, conversations like this actually remind us of the delicate balance between identity and responsibility.
Yeah, I think that is very, very correct. Identity and responsibility. I think the responsibility is very, very important. And I just feel that, in my opinion, she's practically shooting herself in the leg, just like I said in the previous video that was addressing the same issue. And eventually those people she's trying to please are going to watch her bleed out. Are you getting it? Because from what we know, these guys always they have this agenda of liking their kind. They fit narratives. They always push for narratives that keeps people in boxes so that they will look so advanced and so better than others. And you can imagine our ladies, even this lady in question now, the hair she's putting on is not African. These are artificial hairs, and that they pretend the kind of people that are Caucasians, and she's not Caucasian. These people, the way they have, they try to just affect the minds of Africans. They make them feel as if we are second or third, or we are second to them or something. You get it? So, and this is not really the best thing. Some of our ladies here too, they use bleaching creams, all because they want to look light. And they're trying to fight the nature of their bodies. So, these kind of things, we should all just know that there are narratives that are being pushed by certain people, and you should not fall victim of this kind of weird narratives. We should rather focus our minds at developing our home country and making the impact that we can make to help our communities in the best way possible. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please remember, subscribe, turn on the bell notification, give a like, and more videos will be coming shortly.